Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. If you would like to have one of your tracks featured in one of these videos, all you gotta do is head on over to the Discord channel and do a Discord. Yeah, what I meant to say was do a submit, and submit the file to the channel that's all set up for it. It's labeled. Also, so is the rules for it. There's also mods and stuff who will help you out and will also straight up tell you to change things about your file in case it's wrong. Because if things like it's not named properly or I can't download it, then there's issues. And then it's randomly selected if it gets selected, and then we end up seeing them here. Like we are first up, this track called Chaos Theory by Velutz. Let's see what this is like. Wow. This was awesome. This was a technical masterpiece. It was probably also a musical masterpiece. I say probably because I genuinely don't listen to a lot of what this is, but for what this is, it did all the right stuff. It hit all the right boxes and felt good doing it. Like, it's extremely loud. But it also, the fun thing about doing incoherent genres that are not necessarily, well, more coherent than like noise. There's such a thing as noise music, which is about as ridiculous as it sounds. And then there's a kind of like, you come back from that a bit and it's got some quality of dance to it. And this track is a really good example of like a very not as inaccessible version of it. And it was interesting because I was today, for totally unrelated reasons, thinking about like a kind of rumbly sort of bass experience and how I might work on and use some of that. And it's fun to see this used in this way, in the sense that it's not even that we were trying to hear a note in the bass. We just needed to feel it. And if we weren't trying to feel a note, that means that we could feel other things. And then other times, like, I like that the more complicated things kind of happened nearer towards the end when we got way used to the stuff. In the beginning, I was about to talk about how this was kind of loud. Like not just like it's loud. I turned the whole thing down, but this is like, that's a lot of power in this range. And it's a lot of power in every range in this track, but it's also balanced right. It rolls off well. There's no clipping. This thing isn't clipping ever. And that's tremendous for a track like this. I also like the very paying attention to negative space. Very good use of negative space. I was trying to find a word that wasn't very good. Couldn't do it. Just had to say it. This was a very good use of negative space. Most of the time when you hear a track or a genre that's really like going so far as to fill up a spectrum like this, they just tend to do that the whole time. And then if they do try to like pull back on it, this is where you start to see the problems, because there's usually an either or thing. You're either going to master for having a big wall of sound of a wall, big craziness, or there's going to be darkness that you are being slow for, that you're not pushing as hard as you can, that you're not, brickballing, because it'll sound bad otherwise. But it's, obviously you can do both. It's just hard work. And this is excellent to see it done well. This was a very good experience. So good job with that. Velutz. Many ways to say that name. There's also many ways to say this next name. I almost just tried to copy and paste it from the thing, but that's not how that works. I need to fold it with the file in it. Come on, brain. All right. Here we have Reconfigure by there you go. Sigjir. I don't know. Sigjir. It's honestly pretty cool looking. Let's see what it sounds like. 1 second note when and how I start this. And then maybe do it again, but at the beginning? That'd be nice. That's interesting. It lets me reload the file without changing the playhead. Huh. Well, anyway. Mouse, there you are. That was pretty cool. Bit crescendo outro like that. So this track was so very close to being gold. This seriously was pretty great. But it's got one very big issue, which is the main sound. And it's not even the sound it is. I like the sound, and I like this whole moment. You can see the pitch change in there. It's kind of neat. But the slight offsetedness of it. Like, it definitely, it set the stage in a way that I liked a lot. But there were two problems with this. One, this was a bit too powerful for how not powerful this was in comparison. But then two, this is only this way because your main thing is really on top of stuff a lot. And it's cool, except that, like, this moment, how powerful the drums felt and relative to the bass in this section is how powerful I would have wanted them to felt relative to the main element in this section. That that needed to get hit a little harder by the kick and the snare. In a lot of sidechain scenarios, you might see, like, if you ever watch me do one or see other people do it, you see lots of doing really big, deep holes, but you don't necessarily need to do that if you don't want to have the effect. You can still sidechain it, but make it, like, really fast and tight and to the speed of the kick and the snare so that it will mostly just sound like the kick and the snare is suddenly more on top of stuff and doesn't in any way affect the rhythm or, like, tonality of the things it's on, if that's what you were trying to avoid, because you wanted to actually hear the thing on it, which I agree with. Like, this is a bit dark. There's not a lot of higher frequencies on it. And it's really not that, like, harmonically interesting. It's just such a cool, smooth, nice palette and rhythm. This track has a nice aesthetic, a nice groove. It's just the power of the kick and snare is not consistent enough over time on the main element for it to feel like as good as it did during this element, which I didn't even know would feel that good. I this whole time I was in here feeling, I was working up by description of the drums and the power, and then when I heard this part, I was like, oh, good, I could just say sound like that. Like, that's what I thought. But if, like, just to go above and beyond a bit, if this track had, like, the individual kick and snare power of, like, a Mephius track, and then nothing else changed, this track would be actual gold. This is so good. This is such a good feeling. I liked it's just exactly the right kind of this. It's so on. It's really funny how on it is. Other than that, there's too much low power here. Like, that whole thing about the power and the kick and snare could probably solve that, but especially if you did it that hard. Like, if you really nailed it, like the way that works, then that would do that. But one big way you can make it feel like it did is that you just kind of high pass this stuff a little harder or turn it down a bit so that there's not a lot of, like, primary power until the first moment happens. And then after that, you just go ham. But very good job otherwise. Keep up that work. Like, keep doing that. You're very close to, for a real goal. Gold. Trying to say gold. Anyway, up next is Greenhouse by Chase Dunkley. Let's see what you are like. Okay, so this has extremely pretty music. I'm not really against any of the layout decisions. This kind of went on a bit, but it's suitably epic sounding. Like it's sort of inspirational and like swelling, if you will. So that sort of fits. The drum mix was a bit intense. It almost was basically the total opposite of the previous track in the sense that the drums were a bit like. It's like during this segment, this segment here, the drum levels make perfect sense. Like 80s sort of like metal mixing, but not in a metal band style. But earlier than that, like this kind of thing going on, and for how loud those drums are for later, they are way too loud for this section. In the sense that they completely overpower everything in there, but are mainly just kind of on top of stuff here, but not so much because they aren't as loud as they were a second ago. It's mainly because now the writing is sort of backing it up. That wasn't as cohesive an element in this bit, in this section. Overall, though, so like depending on the kind of samples you were using, you might be able to get away with, or libraries or whatever. You might be able to get just playing lower velocity, and that might just help that. It's already pretty sparse. Maybe this particular thing could have been like kind of ramped in velocity, but it's that's just nitpicking. Like it wasn't that bad, and like I've heard worse mixing and better, bigger things. So good job. They don't do this. They didn't really do this anymore. But like in particular, when I was first learning how to mix metal things, that kind of sounded like this. I looked a lot at Periphery's early work, and their stuff was like drum focused. It was the thing that like had all the power, and I didn't even realize how much until one day I went to go listen to it in the car, and I realized I couldn't hear anything else. I couldn't hear any other instrument without making the drums too loud to listen to. And then they apparently realized this too, and they mixed it, better. But that like I was into that kind of sound for a while, and that ended up being true for a lot of my stuff too. And it kind of was like that, like to this degree of overpowering. That's why I'm kind of bringing it up. It's sort of reminded me of that, which is to say, it's not as though that came from nothing. That's certainly from stuff. Some things are just like that. Anyway, up next we have Paranoid by Outcry. Let's see what this is like. At the beginning. There we go.
Your mind.
Haven't you learned anything then from the mistakes of...
Now I can't sleep, and I can't breathe, 'cause the tears in my eyes, they keep me up at night. Can't you see what you've done to me? My sanity's devouring, and I'm paranoid.
This is a staff announcement. Just like a little message to Paul, you're a fucking dickhead, and fuck you and fuck your job. Send my P45 through the post, you dickhead.
Oh. Okay, so this ruled top to bottom. Like, the only actual complaints I have about this are so very nitpicky. It's mostly just about the fact that it clips. Like, it shouldn't clip. But it also is a little bit burny. In fact, you can kind of see it in the vector scope here. You know how you see it like kind of get pushed up into that square? That's what it means. That's what the clipping looks like in 2 dimensions. And if you also saw that like kind of tinge of high frequency data that was kind of up there and then also down there, that little bit of separation of it being concentrated up there and not in the middle there is exactly what that kind of burning tinge of distortion sounds like. That was just on everything in this track. And not just the cool moments with the fun stuff that was the neat, cool kind of bit crushing that was going on. Pretty much your sub is high enough that it's essentially ring modulating everything. And it comes across as a little bit of a burn. It's not as though that made it sound bad. It really didn't. This was amazing. And not just because it just sounded cool and had good sound design, but this is a very rare version. I have seen very little of these tracks that are like this, that are worth its length. This actually has 2 drops of content, but in a accelerated kind of like exponential way. Like there's the main bits and they do the main thing that's cool, and then there's variations, and then there's more of it, and then the variations are faster and denser as the song ends. That's the way to do it. This track kept attention a whole length, which is really hard to do for these sorts of things that are genuinely designed to be single drop fodder for mixes and DJ sets. It's probably still going to get used just for that, but now it might get used twice because its drops are that good. That sort of thing. That's honestly like I've never actually looked at it and put this together. That's actually a good math to kind of approach for this sort of thing. If you're thinking about what should I even be doing for my next drops. The advice I give to people, like, this isn't necessarily what happened here, but like what I tend to think of is you make your loops for your 16 bars and make that sound good. And then that tends to be where people get stuck because they're like, cool, I know I got to make a variation of it, but all of what I've done sounds like what I wanted to do, and every other thing that's not that sounds bad. So what do I do to make it that but different? And the perspective I like to hold is to say, just to remix it, like approach this as though you were remixing, like you were just giving it to you in a collab. What are you going to do to it? Like what do you want to have? How are you going to treat the material while still kind of respecting it? Which is what you want to do. And then after you do that, there's kind of like the second drop thing. And now normally, what I tend to do is just copy paste, make variations, and that will work. But some of the changes I'll do are pretty predictable things. Like actually, you kind of did one here too, like this kind of big lead in on there. Oh, there was one really excellent. That bit where you faded in like the shut up with like the metal effects. I think it was this one. Nope, this one. Yeah, there's so many. Like the detail work, the focus to detail is what sells this track for me. There it is. Like integrating a person, like a vocal chop in like spectrally to kind of fill in the filter like that as an action, as opposed to filtering in like other more synthetic material. Wow. Thanks, Edison. Jeez. I hit the play button. That. And like getting a little knife effect in there. Like, good stuff all the way up. This is such an impressive track. Jeez. All right, I'm done gushing on it. Good job, Outcry. Moving on, we have Theater by Elija Mergold. As of load. Yay. Yay. Let's see what this is like. Let's see what this is like in the big. hot damn. This is another track that's pretty well 3 steps from gold. That's fun looking. That's the neat little expression of that kind of effect there. This is a very unique track. There's lots of super cool stuff happening here, and oh boy, is it also just on the edge. So there's some wibbliness happening kind of throughout everything, and that's really my only big technical complaint. Like, I almost a little had a thing to say about the snare in the early beginning. But then, you know what? It didn't even take 2 hits. I got into it, and it still doesn't like hit or ring the way that I'm used to, but it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. This is a neat texture. Like, I like it a lot. And I can see why you let some of the things be the way they are with how good this texture was. This section was cool, by the way. I will respect your decision to want it to be that kind of rhythm. I will just say for sure that maybe it didn't need to happen that many times. Although it did happen that many times, helped me to make sure that it was in fact in the track and not actually a thing that was an error on my end, because that's actually what I thought happened. That's kind of a problem if you make someone think not even that you made a mistake, but that their playback made a mistake when your stuff's that far off time, even if it's intentional. But anywho, the difference in textures between this section, like this, it was very brave to be using this much tom pressure at all, but like how awesome this section was probably what informed the overall choices you made for how hard certain things went at what times. But here's the thing. You might be trying to find a sweet spot setting, or maybe you're not. I actually have no idea how or what you were trying to do when you did this. This is what's so cool about this track. This track, like, it went to an absolutely unique direction and location, and I like that. I like where it went, and that's why I'm not even going to talk about, like, the sound design was great. Like, the textures were all wonderful. Your layering and the way you rolled off on the highs, all of that stuff was awesome. If I had to fix this track in one step, what I would do is I would turn it down in the master before the compression enough so that these sections that were without the main hardest stuff didn't kind of wobble so much. In particular, like these moments. That kind of arrhythmic association with what's happening, like, is a power wow, God. All that stuff I was about to say is technically true, but this is just the most confusing way to say it. This is a speed problem with the time actuation of your compressor. The release time in particular is the one that you want to mess around with to screw with it. You might even be using a compressor that's already actuating based on time, and if it is, it'll have a setting that angles it on the faster side or the slower side. And for this stuff, you want the faster side. If you're not automating it at all, that would actually be the best case scenario, because if you were automating it at all, and it like, or whatever automatic process was causing it to actually be changed, and it still sounded like this, then it would actually be a much harder fix. And that turning it down option would basically be your only one. And the result would be that it would sound not as loud, but a DJ worth anything would happily ride the fader to have this track in their set. This is a really good track. The suggestion I'm saying, though, is that if you're not automating it, it means you can. That means during sections like these that warble like that, you can either slow it down enough that the warble is not detectable, or you speed it up so much that it's just part of the texture now. And it's so far away from like where the notes are supposed to be that it's not like interfering with the oscillation of your chords. And that's pretty much the time consideration. There's also like distortion and stuff. If your compression actuates faster than you oscillate, it will change the shape of your waveform by acting on volume inside the oscillation. So that's in its wave shaping, but that's what the threshold is. So like if you're playing a pretty high note, you can go pretty fast. And like if you play a pretty low note, you have a different question. So like the problem of balancing full spectrum sections like this is picking that particular sweet spot, but the value is different on different energy balances, which is why like I kind of, this is what I was doing when I didn't know any of the stuff I just said to you. I would, balance for the most loudest, coolest section and just kind of live with certain other choices, especially if I got a tone as cool as this. I could see that being like a big priority, being like, well, I know this is kind of suffering for it, but holy damn, did you hear this shit? This shit was good. Good stuff was good. All right. Coming up next, we have Rain by Zac Oran. All right. So this track did a real good job of straddling being too much in so many directions at once, and it was just a very incredibly balanced attempt. Um, it's not very loud or charging or crazy, and it's actually very like I dig the transitions. They're very like it made sense when it got to the end. Like this all kind of came together, but when it got here, I was confused a bit. But these all stuffs like here's what I'm talking about. Good times, fun stuff. Okay, a number of things have now become pushing in certain directions that become somewhat uncomfortable. One of them being, of course, that these mouth sounds sometimes can a little quickly transverse into being water sounds, as you all are familiar with my own sounds and my voice. Sorry. But, and then also this like whippy woobly pitchy woppy. This stuff like is just on the edge of being too much. And it's really interesting how it all comes together and is not ever too much in any of those directions. Because even when it isn't just about having like a clicky tappy voice thing that does have a kind of liquidy edge to it, it's often sometimes about a frequency of like the notes you choose that just come out that way. And none of those choices were ever made in this track. It's like a perfectly balanced version of all of these elements. That keeps it from being ridiculous. Like, it's just on the edge of being ridiculous, and it's just delightful. That's awesome. It honestly takes work to do this kind of stuff. Here's something I find funny about this. When I was zoomed in on this level and I got to this bit here, this is the one part in the track that sounded at least a little bit watery. What I was thinking when I saw that is that, you know, this kind of looks like an underground little, like, almost like, or maybe not even underground. It's like straight up like a river or like a lake or something. Like, here's a body of water. Here's some like trees and stuff. And like, and it looked a little bit like a body of water. And then that was the part that sounded watery. And that was the only part that sounded watery to me. So like that, I thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, decent gerb. I dig overall all around. This is an example also of something that definitely has power and weight and bass to it, but is not like we didn't have that particular compression issue, despite having almost similar texture. Like this doesn't go as hard as the previous track, but it's mostly because it isn't overdriven as hard, and it's just allowed to be at the lower level and allowed to feel the way it's supposed to, and it feels okay. Up next, we have Arena by Shock Value. Oh, let's see what this is like.
Suck it. I can have a suck it. Shock Value.
the fade. Okay, well, so this is cool. I dig the texture. Like I like the big old bass. I was gonna say also some of the sound design was pretty fun. Like I dig this kind of reversey hit lead thing. I guess it was happening earlier, but I couldn't really tell it was doing that fun like reversey bit until here when it was by itself, and that was cool. I was gonna say a thing about the bass. I like how active it is. I'll tell you what, it's a pretty good part of the texture. Oh yeah, here's something. This track has like the inverted phase profile that it needs, or like stereo image rather. Interesting looking. So what I'm hearing is a lot of the low frequency stuff is stereo as hell, and the high frequency stuff, a lot of like the main lead is right in the middle, and there's no room air on that at all. That's a lot of empty space there. If this is a beat meant for someone to rap on, then that makes sense. I get a little bit of that feeling, a little bit of that vibe. Not really sure what the plan here was. If that was the plan, I could kind of see that, because I could also totally see slapping on like a really fat kind of, synthy trap lead. Like I could see that being the case too. And if that was the plan, and that's what literally you're making room for, then these choices make sense. Because then otherwise, you literally made the opposite choice. And even on top of that, you probably shouldn't have your stereo be that deep this far down. I'm not 100% sure how this would sound collapsed. Interesting choices regardless. It's a little bit pushed. Also, it's clipping. Shouldn't be clipping. Huh? But otherwise, a good vibe and a good time. Dope track. Dope tracks all around you guys. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. And come check out the Discord. We have fun and games.